from ideas to market, strategies, and best practices to push for innovation through intellectual property rights and facilitate them going into the market and getting monetized. Anil Sarangani, Director of Innovation, Universidad de los Andes in Chile. Marco Matías Aleman, Assistant Director General, Deputy Director, OMPI, Switzerland. Moderator, María del Pilar Troncoso, Partner and Director of the Intellectual Property Department at Troncoso, Leroux, Dominican Republic. Hello, everyone, and those of you, the brave ones who are here in this room, thank you very much. To me, it is an honor to be here in this panel from ideas to the marketplace. It is so important for us as professionals to know how, in different institutions, people are collaborating and working together, pushing for innovation, especially in these countries. And it is because a driver of economic development is innovation and economic growth for companies. And no one can talk about this better than these panelists who will give us different perspectives based on the institutions they represent. Marco Matias Aleman, great friend of ASIPI. I've known him for many, many years. Marco, I cannot say how long ago we've been friends, but from the all the way from WIPO times, and then we have the innovation seeding point of view. We have Anil Sadarangani. I have to pronounce it many, many times so I can get it right. Without further ado, I would like to leave you with the audience. We will have two presentations. Marco will go first, then Anil. We will ask him some questions, and then we will review the rest of the information. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much, ACP, for having me and being able to review something that is very current and very important. One of the things that are evidenced in mature markets is that intellectual property has a key role, which is benefiting the different stakeholders within the intellectual property ecosystem. So, how do we tap into intellectual property? And the best way to tap into intellectual property is to put different products in the market, those products that have an IP component to them. That is how you bring all of these things together in the IP ecosystem. And a claim you hear somewhat frequently from the public policy point of view is how can IP solve orphan disease situations? And the answer is simple, because orphan disease does not have a market and intellectual property works properly when there is a market. Why a university that spent resources in trying to get a patent will not benefit from it? Well, eventually, because there is no business model for getting something out of that patent. When you have intellectual property is when you see a great role being played. How do we see this as WIPO? At WIPO, in the sector that I lead, which is called Intellectual Property and Innovation Ecosystems, we have different work areas. And in those work areas, there are two that I believe are key. One is the intellectual property department for innovators, and that is how do we support different innovators so they can use the intellectual property structure within those innovators. We have universities, most definitely, especially in more recent times, where your university plays a role as a research center and a knowledge development center, but a more active role in transferring that knowledge and technologies into the marketplace. And on that, I will focus more later on and review some topics that so we can make sure that those stakeholders, either public or public research centers and universities, can get the best out of intellectual property. A second group is intellectual property for businesses. Because a first thing we should clarify is the following: our panel session is ideas into the marketplace, not from the lab to the marketplace. And from ideas to the marketplace will include private stakeholders, SMEs, tech companies, and some other stakeholders that sometimes have great ideas that do not necessarily translate into products that make it to the market, and they need support. And for it, in these 16 minutes that we have now left, I will focus on some things around intellectual property in the business world and some opportunities that we see here, and then I will finish with some reflections in the academic world. Now, on the business side of it, we always have a list of advantages that intellectual property offers, and we have clear advantages like a competitive edge that you get from intellectual property. And we've said this many, many times, especially attorneys that focus on intellectual property since years ago. We've been taught that intellectual property rights is a negative right, and its exercise is translated by preventing others from doing something that I have a right to do. So that part of intellectual property is key. That possibility through intellectual property to be seen in a market or to reach other markets is an advantage for intellectual property, that it works as a competitive edge, that it helps to mitigate risks. But there are two of those functions that I think are key for our panel today: that it be an additional source of revenue and associated to intellectual property, and that it works along with, and we will expand on this one, we will spend some time talking about it. It should be a mechanism of access to funding and bringing in funding, because in that way, intellectual property will help those ideas to become products that make it to the marketplace. So, in that sense, we will focus on those topics that I believe are the core issues for our panel today. How can we make intellectual property become an extra source of revenue and also make it a source of funding? About that, the first thing we have to say is the following, and I mentioned it in my opening remarks on Sunday. Intangible assets are today somewhere about 90% of the market value for companies. In a recent analysis that I mentioned about intangible assets in our economy that was published in May by WIPO, we saw that the 15 most innovative companies in the United States, 90% of the market value of these most innovative companies in the United States was the value of their intangible assets. So that greater role of intangible assets in business activity translates into specific benefits. So, SMEs, in a research done by WIPO, in that research, they're saying that SMEs that have intellectual property have a performance of revenue that is up to 68% higher than that of those that do not have IP. And they pay wages on an average of 19% higher than that of companies that do not have IP. So, the fact that you have IP and having IP assets does translate in a better performance of these SMEs when it comes to business performance and also connected to the benefits they provide to their employees. However, we do all know that SMEs and using IP, which is 90% of the companies in the world, most of SMEs do not know how to use IPs. And Most SMEs do not use IP. In that same research by WIPO, they're saying that only 9% of SMEs in Europe register intellectual property information. And when we deaggregate the data, we see that less than 1% have patents, about 8% have trademarks, and less than 1% have industrial designs. So, the opportunity we see as we try to mobilize SMEs to use intellectual property schemes or structures is very great, and the numbers are consistent with what can be done about that. One indicator that we use as a proxy, and economists more than attorneys love to use these proxies, is trademark requests. When we take a look at trademark requests throughout the world, we can identify that that gives us an indicator of how products make it to the marketplace. Innovation, which is measured through a patent proxy, tells us about new technologies coming into the market, but not necessarily putting the product in the market. Brands are actually closer to putting products in the marketplace. They're much closer to the market. If we take a look at brands in the market, with the exception of last year, where we saw a slight reduction of about 2% in the amount of trademark requests. The trend has been the ongoing increase of trademark requests worldwide, which is mimicked or seen in Latin America. If this is a proxy that tells us that there are more products going into the marketplace, that means that in the world, and Latin America is no exception, you see more and more products that are making it to the market. So the question is, what do we want to do with these brands from the business standpoint? We can use it as a defensive tactic when there is abuse, counterfeit, fraud, or we can use it so we can prove that there is penetration into a given market. But we could also use it in a different way. And this is where I think there are two things we need to consider. So, item number one, what can we do so we can improve those numbers when it comes to using intellectual property? And then what can intangible asset owners do so they can get a better benefit from it? Let us take a look at the first thing. What are countries doing to help SMEs to have more intellectual property rights? Let me just give you a list. In Canada, tools are being put together for intellectual property strategies. Business rounds are set, supported by governments, attempting to commercialize intellectual property. In Japan, they put together guarantee systems that secure intellectual property rights, and they put together support mechanisms as they evaluate those intangible assets. These are some of the intentions that the government have in different places of the world, so that the private sector uses intellectual property more and more, and especially when it comes to SMEs, like we said a moment ago, there is a bigger need for support. But wanting them to do it for what? IP for what? Just to list intangible assets? Or do we think there can be another use around intellectual property? And we believe, and there was a project I've been leading in WIPO for 3 years now, and that is using IP as a collateral means to access credit. This is how a lot of the world works. In Latin America, we have anecdotal information about the use of intellectual property that has been used as a collateral so you can tap into funding. But a massive project where intangible assets are useful for companies so they can access credit instruments, I think is a great opportunity because A, so that owners understand that intellectual property is not just something preventing a sanction, but actually, as you have it, you can use it for your economic benefit, such as getting funding. So, some examples: American Airlines and their issues and access to credit during the pandemic for a lot of their projects. So, American Airlines got $10 billion worth of credit. What they used was their signage, or their, if 90% of the market value of companies is comprised by intellectual property, it just can't be that the system uses only intangibles. Like I said at the opening on Sunday, as of 2007, intangible assets in our economies represent more than tangible assets. but it is just normal to have a different view as to how to use intangibles as a guarantee to access funding. And you probably saw in my LinkedIn a guide that we at WIPO are launching focused on SMEs. So SMEs know how to value and use their intangibles as collateral. And a guide for financial companies so they can consider intangibles as collateral uh, as they do now with tangibles. So at WIPO, we put together a project, like I said a moment ago, using intellectual property as access to credit, which starts with a mainstreaming of information. How does it work? And we start with a project with the Singapore case. This is what I'm quoting today, but there are more than 15 reports in the WIPO website on how we use IP as collateral for credit. This is not a legal issue. It's actually using those resources so those good ideas within companies make it to the marketplace. And more and more at WIPO, we see growing practices on using IP to access credit instruments. And because of time constraints, I have only 6 minutes left. Let me just go on to the next topic. And the next topic is how can intellectual property, aside from helping those good ideas from uh, uh, business owners and also using intellectual property as a mechanism so they can access credit, which will help their products make it to the market. Let me now focus on the second part of that, and that is how can intellectual property play a similar role in universities? When we say university and research and development centers, we oftentimes do not talk about the market and not we call it the market, but not so much the market lab. This is what you see in the academic world and in public education. This is not a small issue. In a study we published in 2021 from WIPO, we did it together with Cambridge University. We analyzed technology transfer schemes in the 21st century, and we focused on the following. In developed nations, 75% of research and development focused on basic sciences is done with private funding, or rather, 75% of research and development in general is done with private funding in developed countries, and 25% with public funds. In the developing world, 75% of research and development is done with public funding and only 25% with private funding. If we go to basic sciences, in the developing world in basic sciences, it's actually 100% with public funds. So if it's 100% with public funds and then applied, if basic is 100% and applied is 75%, how do we use those funds in order to have economic ownership and exploding all that and exploring all that? So this is great. And when we focus on research and development, well, actually universities and public research and development centers. In that sense, WIPO has been working with universities, research facilities, that want to be closer or get closer to the private sector and exploit their knowledge and technological development so that those ideas make it to the marketplace. So, what we've been doing so far is working with universities and public research and development centers throughout the world so we can design intellectual property policies around that academic structure or within the public sector. And it's a simple thing. It's just a document that should reflect on ownership, rules for recognizing intellectual property rights, collaboration standards with third parties, which will determine what those parameters are, so we can go from ideas to market, guidelines on how to move around the different economical benefits, and then review those intellectual property rights. To those of you who are interested in taking a look at this, there is a hyperlink. There's an intellectual property policy database that has more than 800 intellectual property examples. and can provide advice to any of you who want to bring this to your universities in your countries so you can adopt intellectual property practices. When we talk to universities, we see that in the academic world, there are basically different sets of results from scientific research. Some of them focus on intellectual property, some other focus on some other type of intangibles. Those who do it through intellectual property, they usually have an agreement in at the academic world, which is the disclosure of a scientific activity or a project that has commercial feasibility and a series of other disclosure schemes. And in that, we have two big assets in terms of intellectual property, and we could call them protectable intellectual property. Those are the ones on the right: patents, trademarks, licenses, and whatnot, and those that are not protectable but continue to be high value assets, such as ready to use formulas, knowledge, plans, blueprint, and some other things that have value as knowledge but are not always necessarily protectable through intellectual property. So, a key issue when it comes to that university policy is identify what are the actions that can be taken when it comes to all these assets that go from protection, sharing them, looking into options, transferring them, and identify potential ventures with different stakeholders and the possibility for collaboration. Those public policy policies should cover all these different possible actions in using intellectual property. So, we've then made it to something from the university point of view, and for the purpose of this panel session, well, what is this trading of intellectual property? So, trading from the business standpoint is not the same as trading from the university point of view. These are two sides of the same thing or the same thread. So, meaning when the university transfers it, they transfer it to a private entity, and a public entity, when they transfer it from a university to a research and development center. And we could define that as a process through which economic value is created as they convert knowledge, discoveries, and inventions into products and services that are new or significantly improved. In that sense, we can then say, when we place resources to generate knowledge, we are therefore doing research. But when we use knowledge to produce resources, we are actually commercializing them. It is then in that second stage, when we are using knowledge and technology, that we use it so we can produce resources through different ways like licensing and others. Then this is when we're commercializing. So you see commercialization as a word two times in yellow. So the first time is the actual commercialization of intellectual property, which is where we see the commercial plan and feasibility plan. This is where we know what to do with IP. We separate it, we license it, we use it so we can put together a company. That is commercialization of IP. The next part of it, when products hit the market and we benefit from their commercialization as they are traded in the market, we are actually using the products that have intellectual property, but that is not a commercialization of intellectual property. And this is something that has happened before. Because of time constraints, I will stop here. I give you back the microphone and we will continue. Thank you very much, Marco. Very interesting. And I think that we as attorneys and as speakers in each of these countries, because I know that WIPO goes through great strides, but it is sometimes difficult to cover every single university. I think we have an important role in connecting with universities, connecting with research centers, um, especially when it comes to funding. It is very important to deal with universities so they can then hit the market. So there are a series of issues around intellectual property that we're really missing in Latin American countries and in universities. We know that in the University of Los Andes, they have great experience with regards to all of this, and Anil will talk about this, but I think there's a lot for us to cover at a country level. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Great. Thank you very much. I will. I will introduce myself. First, thank you, ASIPI, for having me. I think we met in March. Marcos, Maria, and Hitch, who also introduced me to ASIPI, and I apologize, I am not an attorney. It's all kind of fun. You start to, once you get the hang of it, it's kind of nice. So let me just tell you in 20 minutes what the University of Los Andes does, what a research and development facility is, and why this is so important to push for development. And there is some literary work. I I am a biologist. I went to university to study biology because I wanted to save whales. And as I moved along in my career, I realized that research was fascinating. So in my pre-grad years, I started to look into different drugs to fight cancer, endometrial cancer, and others. And I saw that what we were doing was not affecting tumoral cells. So the holy grail about this. So then I looked into stem cells, and I saw a lot of connections to the rest of the market. So and we didn't go to the private sector, which is normal in the developed world. In the developed world, they go to the private sector to get funding to do more research. I kind of like that, and I wanted to get more training on this, and this is how I bumped into how important intellectual property is. Can any of you tell me what Google, Gatorade, and cherry tomatoes have in common? Those of us who went to the paddle session kind of reviewed this. We have a little bit of a prize for whoever nails this. Okay, so someone. Okay, so you spilled the beans, so I'm gonna ask him to kick you out of the room. Do you know why it's called Gatorade? The Gators, University of Florida, the trainer notices that players were dehydrated. They were losing water and some other minerals that are in Gatorade. So he wanted the Gators to make it to the Nationals. That is why this drink ended up being very famous. I hope they sponsor a CP next year. So cherry tomatoes, Jerusalem guides us through you do growing them with very little water, and then Google, the biggest invention from the University of Stanford. It's going obsolete with Chat GPT, but Google is the biggest search engine in the world. This is my university is a new university, 35 years old already in the Andean region, and we've always believed in applied sciences. So we're not only teaching lawyers like you, we can also generate new knowledge and have that knowledge transferred to the market, to society, and making it have a positive impact. That's how innovation was born in 2010. The team is down there, and then we have the celebration. We sat down with all researchers, business people, and we wanted to connect with people. We had a lunch, not much dancing like you, but we sat down and talked, and we talked to the academic world and the business world, and we wanted to bring them together. And this was born trying to connect with society and the private sector. We have four pillars we work with: training, knowledge transfer, and research and development R&D. And then the last one is how do we connect with society? We're not just an Eiffel Tower looking from above and does not get feedback from society. As an academic center, we are trying to teach innovation. We can look into technological transfers. This needs to be managed. That management can be taught. We've systematized that. And today we have our professors, and professors are introducing this in the curriculum early on. So students finish and they get their bachelor's with some training on this. We have partnerships with the armed forces in Chile, with the army in Chile. So why not involve armed forces when it comes to entrepreneurship, because they are also connected to this. This is what we've done in the last few years. This may be interesting to you. We're doing this. We can talk to a CP. We've launched this innovation academy. We basically group everything we've done. This is an online and in-person training course, and we're happy to do it together with the CP. We have some modules. We can add more modules, but basically, in one way or another, we're putting all these ideas for ideas to market and doing that. So, this is a quote: "Knowledge generates an impact on society." This is an R&D and innovation management effort. It's online, but in Chile, we've been reaching innovation rankings because we look a lot into the market with universities. Universities usually want to get papers published, but those papers are usually read by 4 or 5 peers in the world who do the same thing as them. And it is difficult to have an applied product, so we try to involve researchers. Yes, you can publish something, but we want to tell you that first you can protect that idea or product so you can ultimately trade it and have a greater impact. And that knowledge transfer is basically building those bridges. How can we make these two worlds converge? The academic world that basically thinks around publishing scientific articles because the academic career and being a tenured professor is important to them. How do we do it from the innovation side so we can tell these academics this can have an impact? We can save lives. Our children can read better. We can have a better, richer economy in Chile. We have the three P economies, the three P's economy. What does Chile live off of? So P in Spanish for stones, and then fish in Spanish, salmon, and rare earths. So that's how we are an extractionist economy. How can we go from extractionism to generating knowledge, which will lead to more diversification? Obviously, getting a lot of money. We need to invest in it, of course. And we could do this as a Latin American region. Let me just tell you a little bit of the history of research and development. This was started in 1925. They discovered that sunlight allowed some molecules to generate vitamin D. They didn't know this. People who weren't exposed to light had some diseases, and this researcher said, "Hey, I would like to turn this into a product. How can I do this?" Knowledge transfer didn't exist in universities. This was ultimately lost. This was then made public. Ultimately, students from Wharf University, the University of Wisconsin, uh, turned this office into the knowledge information office to turn this into assets so the university can get some revenue off of it. This moved really fast until the 80s, and in the previous panel, we heard about the Bail Act, where the invention before this law was owned by the federal government. If the government paid for it, then the government would own it. So think about the government trying to own all of this for universities. It was not feasible, and they will ultimately lose it. This law changed this and said, I will give you the funding, and you will be the owner of the intellectual property. So then universities were responsible for managing their own intellectual property. This is a big change. With this Bay Dole legislation, they could own to this and license it and get some financial and social revenue from this. I like to show this cartoon, and this is the issue we have. The science push, where the researcher says this is important, I'm researching this, and then the market pool, what the business sector is asking for. How can we make these two groups come together so we can build something that is aligned somewhat? So we want to be here in this sweet spot. So having a technology that is necessary in the market and something that our scientific team can actually put together. This is where we want to be. Usually in Latin America, we are down here. There's a lot of technology push, but very little market pull. So very few companies need what researchers are researching. No one is interested in getting a crab that walks backwards, right? How can we make our researchers prioritize on the needs in each country? So we need to manage priorities, and this is what we as knowledge transfer people have to deal with that. Well, how do we deal with all this? We have to put together spin-offs from the university point of view, and we have to mature technology. We use this scale from NASA, TRLs. TRL from 1 to 9. 9 is when you're in the shower, and 1 is when you're in the shower, and 9 is when it hits the market. So TRL 2s, they come to us, Anil, how can you help us? We help them with funding, intellectual property, business model. We go to licensing so we can hit the market. So we support them through this TRL process, technical readiness level, so we can then make it to intellectual property. Marco talked about ecosystems. This is the ecosystem we have in Chile. We have incubators, accelerators, we have investment capital or venture capital structures. Corfo, which is part of the Chilean economy, they did something very important. They told investors, get the funding for $8 million and as the Chilean government will double it or triple it. 2 or 3 to 1. This brings down the risk, and you can invest in university led technologies so you can get better returns. So it's a public policy that has been well appreciated nationwide. What we do as university is to support the investigator from the basic investigation or basic research part of it, applied sciences, reviewing it, and then commercialization and actually aftermarket, which is getting royalties after licensing. So this is a little bit of what we've done as a university, and we do this within an ecosystem that I think in Latin America is doing very well in Latin America. Corfo and the National Development Agency, ANIP, in Chile. And Marco was talking about 75%, so public funding is usually or the public sector is usually funding about 75% of research. This incubator is a 1 to 4. When there are big commercial goals, we send them to the accelerator. One thing we've had to do in the country is this: support the ecosystem. How can we train our investors? Because investors in Chile are used to investing in constructing buildings. They do not know how to invest in intangibles. So we have to explain that this is a longer period, bigger risk, but the returns are going to be greater than that of constructing a building. So we want to teach business people about sciences, and the science sector has to learn about doing business. So bringing that together is key. And this summarizes some of the work we do. So we have researchers here, basic researching, high risk, scientific risk, and this risk turns into technological risk and then marketing risk. So the amber curves takes us through the investigation, through the research, we generate more value, and then the risk goes down, right? This is why it is important to do IP management in universities, supported researchers so they can continue to move forward and they can come up with more applications. I have a couple minutes. Let me just show you 4 cases that we put together in the past few years. One of them is about reading comprehension. 84% of Chileans and maybe Latin American don't understand what they read. 84%. And in children, it's actually worse. The last PISA uh, trials were very bad. When they go to university, their reading comprehension is of 8th grade, so they're 4 years behind. If a student cannot read a complicated text, you cannot teach university courses. So this number is even getting worse and worse. So Pelusa Arellana and Carolina Melo, they got the Boni Prize, which is the most renowned prize and award in Chile. They focused on personalized or custom assessment for reading. This is an online test, and this test has the theory and the empirical information that children need so they can read. This test is taken at the beginning of the year. It submits the report to the teacher, to the school principal, and to parents. So this is a 360-degree assessment to understand, to know how much reading comprehension the child has. So we've linked this, we've put together uh, a research and development effort with metametrics, and we use a lexile range. So how difficult the book is. If you look up on Amazon Harry Potter, you will take a look at the L level for these books, and this will be matched with your reading comprehension skills. So for the first time ever in Latin America, we can actually match, like Tinder, but a little bit more professional than Tinder, between the student and the book. So we're the reading Tinder, right? Reading skills Tinder. Hopefully you're not. No one's recording this because I'm gonna get hammered. You cannot go with Don Quixote uh, early on. You have to do it right before university. So you push their reading comprehension. Uh, so we try to take a look at how frustrated they are reading and how they're doing with reading. And let me just summarize this: the impact in 2 minutes. They took a look at final results. All the improvements are on the left. We've been working with teachers, with the schools and school principals, and then we thought, how can we deploy this nationally? We put together a company. We licensed this, the licensing transferring office. So, technological dissemination, development plan, results, disseminating results. We negotiated with Metametrics, with Collegium. This is a school assessment process company. We licensed this, and we wanted a portion of it. So we're in Chile, Argentina, Costa Rica, and Panama not yet, and we're doing it in Spain. We launched a pilot last week. So these are technologies that come off of a research effort. This researcher loved to make her kids read. Now it's a product that's fully launched. Copyrights, I will not go into that. Hopefully, all the copyrights are there. The second case is about fish. Do you remember I said the three things in Chile? So the salmon industry in Chile is very important. The issue that we have with salmon is that 50% of what you eat from salmon is the meat. The other 50% is wasted. The bones, the skin, it goes into fish powder. This is very expensive to process. Usually the processing plant has to pay, so this is moved. So what do we do? Thinking about circular economy, we were for 2 weeks. We were at a salmon plant in Chile. We took a look at some of these products, and we saw that the skin is very good quality. So we ended up doing this: get as much as we can and make it zero waste. We saw that the skin can give us salmon collagen. Salmon collagen because it has some viscosity because it's a cold water animal. It can preserve foods. As a matter of fact, a lot of what we do today is to get the collagen out, and we use it for salmon, and we preserve the shelf life. Chile, which is in, like I said, and it sounds awful, in you know corner of the world, we can have fresh salmon and keep it fresh for 5 6 days. This is very good, and the salmon processing place is good. Then we use some scarring technologies or some scarring applications. We're working with Harvard University, so where they do the research, we give them the salmon, and we're looking into skinned grafts. So there's some research going on. The first product is a gel coat. This is a protector that we put on the salmon. We've used it on chicken and pork that is sent to Korea. So Koreans love fresh salmon, so it doesn't get fresh to Korea. So we're looking into this so we can extend the shelf life. We have companies paying us for this service already. We manufactured it. We put it in the lab. A company, a Chilean company, helped us with this, AgroSuper, and we licensed it to them. We're making it to 10 metric tons per month. We want to make it to 150 metric tons per month in 12 months. So the university couldn't do this, but we looked up companies and we're trying to commercialize this technology. So this is a researcher. He is also my boss, the head of R&D. He's put together this technology. These are some of the rights we are protecting. Brand, obviously at a commercial level, Europe and the United States. We also patented it in the U.S. as well. The third case is about a design where we saw that in Chile there are a lot of dry fruits. In this case, almonds. But there's a lot of manual labor, and we have these people, and you have almonds that are not shredded are more expensive than your poor quality almonds. So we put together a simple process. We put together a machine that can classify tons and tons of almonds quickly. The ladies were out of a job, but the production process was made better, and this was a company that was exporting almonds, and now they've exported this to the rest of the world. And the researcher, in this case Pablo and Juan Ignacio, the business person, this is a model that has been very good. Link your researcher with the business person. This is very relevant because the business side of it tells the researcher their pain points, instead of having the researcher put together a machine that's useless. And then the last case I wanted to talk about is a literary entrepreneurship project that started in March when Hitch and Julio and other people visited us. This is our baby in 9 months, right? So it's our baby, 9 months. This is a literary project. That's the deputy dean with Luis signing on this. This is an idea that had been going on for a while. We needed authorization, and hopefully we'll have more reach. This was for entrepreneurs, and through a CP, we thought we could reach more people, and we thought, why not a new version? And Julio says, well, Anil, this happens in Panama in December. We're not going to make it. And then I was going to enslave the committee, and I made them work hard. And today, here we are, very happy to have launched. We're probably going to do a little bit of a presentation of this third edition, which will be available free of charge, so you can download it. I have some copies available for a CP. Some are available, but it will be available for all the CP partners and all the people who want to use it. Entrepreneurs and attorneys who are learning about intellectual property. These are brand patent issues and things we all know, and we want to be able to expand this knowledge and the importance of intellectual property. I would like to just thank those of the people here. We have Alexander Aguedo, Andrea Gama, Belen Richeni, Daniel Legaspi, Eduardo Varela, Isabel Manrique, Jorge Chivarro, Juan Felipe Puerta, Joli Gutierrez, Leonardo Cordero, Maki Sarangani, María García, María Gabriela Troncoso, Ma- Ma- Morena Salaveta, Marta Landivar, and Soledad Alvarez. And thank you to all of them. And hopefully in the next few years we can get a new version. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. The work you're doing in the university is actually marvelous, and it is an example for all of us, and to see how important the relationship between university and researcher is, and those of us outside. That partnership has made it possible for all this to reach the market. It's essential. This collaboration with the CP as well, with this new book. I want to now move to some questions I want to ask personally, listening to each one of your presentations. And Marco, I'll ask you. From the point of view of WIPO, that collaboration that you're carrying out with entrepreneurs and universities and research labs, that support, the strategy you use is the same for each one? How do you carry out that approach with each one of them, and that support is the same? Is it different? Thank you, Pilar. Actually, it's not the same. The motivations are different. For example, in the case of researchers of public institutions and universities, we found that their main motivation is not financial, it's not economic. There are topics that are more important, like acknowledgement, prestige, the fact of contributing to society, that the projects have a social impact. But one of the topics that we've assigned a lot of relevance to in the past years is elaboration of a guideline of incentives in research for researchers in the university environment, as well as the environment of the public research and development institutions, and incentives to the TTOs, because they are also part of the equation. They also have to be motivated. Without a TDO that works, we saw the example from 1925, without a TTO that works, we will not have that part of the bridge that is essential for the communication between researchers and the private sector, in such a way that what we've prepared is a guideline with the main incentives to consider and samples of different incentives in different parts of the world. And that's been part of our contribution, as I said, in the academic side. In the case of the privates, as we said before, they're part of the equation. Without them, it won't go from the lab to the market. What we've identified is this need of strategies for IP, and we've created what we call the IP management clinics. And these IP management clinics are clinics, one-to-one clinics, where experts like ASIPI members work with groups of SMEs in different parts of the world to identify the specific strategy of that SME and PI, and often it goes through helping them to identify how to contact, how to talk and how to negotiate with those generating knowledge and technology. So part of the strategy is that, as you can see, then it's two key actors, but each one of them requires a different approach. Thank you, Marcos. Anil, in your presentation, you spoke a lot about what you are doing and support to researchers. But as a university, I mean, how can we, or how do you plant that seed in the students? How do you try to promote among students? Often, currently, we have like an inertia, like students don't dive in. I mean, what are you doing as a university regarding students? Well, thank you for the question. We have, I believe, two instances that are quite relevant. Is that we built 3 or 4 years ago, and we haven't seen the outcome yet, but we're starting to see the first fruits. The first thing is the incubator. In the university, we're somehow in a volunteer manner, and apart from the university credits that students have, they can participate in the incubator. They get financing, a maximum of $500, where they present an idea and they're capable to, because usually it's ideas. Nobody comes with an MVP or minimum viable product. So we give them mentors to accompany them and some financing so that they can speed up that idea for a product. And we also generate recognition, like Marco said. We make their deans and vice deans, give some categorization to the students so that they can take classes quicker sometimes. I teach the minor in innovation. I give them a grade for participating in the incubators. The incubator is a site where I hope the students fail, because once they graduate and they go to real life, they have the knowledge. I hope that they've had problems in entrepreneurship in the university, so they won't make the same mistakes in real life. My minor of education is that innovation is optional for each student. For students, I get students from law, medicine, and others. And the incubator, which is a formal process, we connect with the external public audience to finance it. Yes, thank you. Marco, you spoke about what WIPO is doing regarding all the projects on how it's working. What plans do you have, or what are you working on? Give us some heads up. Great. From the entrepreneurial angle, is the use of IP as access to credit that imposes great challenges. It's easy to say you should use non-tangibles as collateral. It's easy to say so, but the reality is that a traditional asset like the apartment or a factory, if the person doesn't pay, if there's failure in payment, the financial institution seizes it and sells it out in the market in minutes. But a bank with a brand or a patent eventually will not be able to recover the value of the credit. But there are different elements that have to be sorted out related to the assessment of non-tangibles, related to the way in which the non-tangibles are executed in secondary markets. This requires large global projects, and that's a project we're working on. From the point of view of technology transfer, is essentially university, private, and public-private research centers. I think the greatest challenge ahead is the following. For many years in WIPO, there was a topic not covered to be academic, and it was a class that was not covered. So if you went to the WIPO page and you look for technology transfer, there was nothing. The technology transfer page was created 3 years ago when we created the technology transfer section, so it's a relatively recent topic. And one of the things we did was the following. We identified our role, and our role in technology transfer, apart from the guidelines, like incentives for research or the guide for negotiating licenses, apart from all those materials, I believe there's two roles that WIPO can carry out. I would say almost exclusively. One is to influence leader in technology transfer. What we did is that we partnered up with OTUM, that you know very well, and with OTUM for the past 3 years, we have a global summit on technology transfer, WIPO OTUM, where we discuss topics that are not just up to date, but regarding the future of technology transfer. And the second thing, apart from that type of work, we identify the following. When we have statistics, it's easier to identify actions and it's easier to mobilize actions because we have the data that is showing the importance. And one of the areas where there's very little statistics available is the technology transfer topic. We're working on the development of metrics and mechanisms that allow us to collect information on technology transfer that will allow the different actors to mobilize public policies domestically, regionally, and internationally. Those are the large points of work for us right now. Thank you, Marco. You mentioned, Anil, something about that interest or that goal that researchers have that they just want to publish scientific publications. How are you working, or what do you believe we can do to make that cultural change of not just having that target? Well, first of all, it's not easy. As I said before, we've been on this for 15 years, and I would say that egos have moved, are the ones that have generated the greatest change in researchers is ego. If I ask who's the best player in the Chilean or Brazilian soccer team, I ask who's the biggest innovator in Chile, Argentina, Mexico, we have very little capacity to recognize as great innovators. So one of the things we do is to try to acknowledge them internally with the participation of the deanship and the companies. And we've been able to put these things in the academic career. Universities respond to accreditation systems, and when the accreditation evaluates the amount of publications, therefore the university aligns or the university publishes more. So from top down, there's some malpractice to promote publications only. With the Minister of Sciences in Chile, we got her to work with the National Accreditation Council and also apply metrics for licensing, patents, and technology transfer. If you don't have the carrot, the incentive, the stick is not enough. This and acknowledgement are the two things that have worked for us for researchers to change the chip and say, well, if I do research that is more applied and I do well and I can market and obtain benefits, I can have better people in my lab, better equipment, and that's a virtuous circle to generate better publications. So there's a win-win that's extraordinary to generate a circle that allows their researcher to be a better academic, and their research can also generate profits for them. Excellent. It's difficult, but it's achievable. Most of us here are lawyers. We're legal advisors. What would you recommend from the point of view of WIPO and from the point of view of the universities? That's the role of the lawyer, our role. How can we better support and guide? Where do we come into scene in all this, and how is it convenient, or do you recommend to us to help them? And it's also useful for us because we're professionals. This is what we do for a living. What recommendations could you give us as lawyers? I ask both of you. From the point of view of WIPO, thank you very much, Pilar. I think the topic is key because, in effect, the role of lawyers and agents and experts in intellectual property is essential in Latin America. The situation is complex, which makes it more interesting. Look what happened in the region, in the LAC region. It went to from contributing from 2.5 of the total request of global patents to only 1.6%, and in brands it went from 8.8 to 7.1 of the global context. Therefore, the total request for protectable PI reduced in the global context in Latin America. So one first action is everything that we can do so that the holders are aware of the important role of intellectual property that translates into a measurable indicator, which is increase in the request for applications for patents, designs, and brands. Why is it essential? Because it is clear that only when there is protection, it's easy to go into exploitation mechanisms, including marketing. If there's no right to protect, to enter into licenses, contracts, it's difficult. If there's no right to use it as a collateral if there's no protection is practically impossible. And in the region, data that's essential is the total transactions of risk capital in the region. The total of the transactions decreased by almost 10%, but the value of the risk capital decreased by almost 30%. If you look at all the indicators, if there's an essential topic is a greater mobilization of this association and this union of the actors of intellectual property to create greater awareness regarding the important role of protection. And protection starts with the request and the good prosecution that could build, depending on how good the outcome is. It could generate a non-tangible asset, and then we see how we exploit it. Anil. Interesting question. I believe there are different lawyer profiles, like there's different biologists in the transfer office. The lawyers that work with us have an entrepreneurial profile. Our lawyer in office has to go and talks to researchers in engineering, the researchers in health. They have to talk to researchers in education and learn about the technology they're working. They have to what is the state of the art and understand it and see what has to be protected, just something to be protected. I think the profile of the lawyer is key to be able to identify them. Are the guys that are more entrepreneurial, that are more into discovering and studying new things, and ASIPI and similar associations have an essential role. I don't know ASIPI very well, it's my first time, but I believe ASIPI has the capacity to open up to other institutions, private sector, universities, relevant actors, public policies, and work with the governments, and I probably do it and know the importance of intellectual property. I'll insist that the only way that Latin America steps out of underdevelopment it requires the management of intellectual property. That's why you're all relevant in your countries. You're the ambassadors to be able to plant the seed. Yes, in fact, in ASIPI we have several programs that precisely are after that, regardless of the fact that we have relations with the different universities, and that in the day-to-day with the artist work of all, we're achieving strategic partnerships with the universities to offer to this community, the ASIPI community. We currently have two programs. You talked about this program, Dialect, for example, children. We, for example, is not the same, obviously, but we have a Sikaduka that with respect to intellectual property, we try to encourage intellectual property value on children, so they know as small when they're small, so they grow with this knowledge. We had ASIPI Emprende. We had an activity here in Panama, and in ASIPI Emprende, that's what we want. We as professionals, sometimes they send us entrepreneurs without economic resources, so that we can help them to patent their invention and see what intellectual property mechanism can protect them, or how can some of them obtain funds to finance what they want to launch into the market. So what we try to do through the ASIPI Emprende program is to show them the benefits of intellectual property, because a large part of these people often, when they get to the advisors, lack the knowledge, and they lost the opportunity for the protection already. So ASIPI does have strong programs in that regard. We continue to expand them, and I believe that this sample of what you've spoken about is material for within ASIPI to continue with this work, because definitely these are partnerships that this is the goal of ASIPI. I'll insist. In ASIPI, well, I think there's an extraordinary human quality. I've had good vibes from you. What you do is very relevant. I think we are lacking better communication. I don't know how to do it. I don't have the magic recipe, but I think we should walk the walk and talk the talk, and go out and talk about the success cases and that impact the population. Anybody lawyer who has been working a license for a drug or a drug. I mean, I do with my children. I want them to know about science, and especially girls that are few women working STEM. So we have to look for motivation and disseminate it. Yes, propaganda is basic. Know what we're doing, what has been done, what are the movements. Sometimes we believe that These are people that are established companies. How it does starts from the beginning. That example that you talked about, the Gatorade and the cherry tomato, that it was universities. I believe it's important that we disseminate. It's important and show to the children, show them how Gatorade and cherry tomatoes. I mean, the story, the history of the entrepreneur is better than just a lawyer saying what is the brand, what are they protecting. But I think the story behind it is more important. I don't know if we have questions from the audience. We have opportunity for maybe a couple of questions. Go ahead. Good morning. In your presentation, you talked a lot about public, private, and academia. I think for several years we've been going to several cities that are trying to uh, there's only Medellin, Santiago, Monterrey, out of all the cities in. What's the 20% of the actions that the other 15,170 cities should also take into account so that this works? I have an answer that worked in Chile, which is the case that I know. I've seen some ecosystems like Colombia and Mexico as public policy. We have a program called Startup Chile, is known worldwide, where Chile said we don't have the capacity for entrepreneurship. We don't have success cases. Let's do a program to provide financing to people from outside. We had people from all over the world. They had a special visa with financing in Chile for 6 months, and obviously they started recruiting Chileans that were there, unemployed, and that was the first generation of Chilean entrepreneurs that, when they did well, they have the capacity of being seedlings for the second, third generation to continue recruiting and set up headquarters in Chile. Then investment funds, public policies, started promoting. We have an innovation building that we launched in March called Startup Campus at Nationwide, where we have labs for entrepreneurs free of charge, but it's work that's taken 15, 20 years, but it starts with public policy. Otherwise, I believe it's impossible that a person on their own can do it. I believe it's a very relevant question, and in effect, in WIPO, we've seen innovation with the Global Innovation Index. But when we analyze what is happening locally at the level of the city or level of the region, because often that city has an impact on the region, we see that the ecosystem works differently, and we have to analyze this in greater detail. What we've done is the following. In the Global Innovation Index, we've been supporting sub-regional indices in the country by region to analyze, for example, what's happening in Medellin. In the case of Colombia, Colombia is one of the countries that has a sub-regional index. And then we're supporting that cluster analysis globally. You'll see in our report of the 100 clusters, the first 100 innovation clusters that are basically cities. We have to analyze what's happening there. The answer of the experts in terms of innovation says two things that I believe are quite relevant. The first one is cities continue to have an important role in innovation today, because when a city does things right, and they have, for example, a university where they create knowledge, other professors would like to be there because they want to be part of that generation of knowledge. Since that university is successful, probably they pay more. And professors that want a bigger salary have to go there. And there's a case of success of transfer of knowledge in the private. The first company that transfers knowledge successfully, the other ones will see what happens there and would like to set up shop there as well. So that in spite of the global trend to remote communication, the reality is that cities play an essential role in a sense, bring together to generate knowledge, and on the other hand, as of there, generate spillovers that will impact the innovation ecosystems in the country and the region. And the second thing, many of the experts agree that the main factor in the promotion at the level of city and innovation is that there's a champion that generates activity. For example, a large company that arrives, sets up shop, and generates innovation. The suppliers of products and intermediate products benefit from that innovative activity in such a way that A lot it takes place through spontaneous generation, but I think public policies can help the first ones to start so the others follow. Thank you. Due to time constraints, I know Soledad, you want to ask a question, but and Anil and Marcos, well, you can ask them the questions directly afterwards. Due to time constraints, we have to wrap it up. But first, we would like to thank you, Marcos, Anil. Actually, it was quite intuitive to know everything you're doing. It's very interesting for all of us. Now we have the launch of the idea to the market, the book, Luis Enrique, President. Let's do the official launch of this book. Yes, yes. The idea here is to have a symbolic exchange of this works. I'll stay here. When we started this period, we set out to improve the ASIPI's positioning in the region, and to achieve this, we decided to carry out a series of visits. The first country we visited was Chile, and the first university or the first meeting that we had was in the Los Andes University with Anil and the rector. And out of that meeting, we saw. Apart from other things, we got him to come here to talk about all of what he's doing, and to help each other to update this publication. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. This publication that they already had prepared and that they wanted to update. We even added a chapter on AI that wasn't there. I would like to thank all of those who collaborated, all the work committees that collaborated in this activity. Anil already mentioned them by name. They work strongly here under the WIP, like Anil said, under Julie's WIP, and that was essential for us to come out with a book from idea to market and to have it available at this event. I think this is an extremely important topic, and this allows me to point out that the seminar for June will be on innovation ecosystems, and as of now, I want to sign both of you up to help us and to collaborate in fine-tuning the agenda, and of course, getting the specialists on board. Anil, thank you so much on behalf of ASIPI and Universidad Los Andes. Tell the rector we're very grateful, and like Anil said, this is works that will be all of you can download, and this material that will be useful, especially for the CP Emprende program, to train these entrepreneurs and give them basic material on intellectual property. So an applause and thank you.